I'm a paranormal investigator for the US government. My agency is getting annoyed. Part 3, The Sunless Sea. Written by Cryptid-Echo. By now, you should know there are some things in life I can't stand. I use the word hate very liberally. In most cases, it's justified. I cannot begin to describe to you how much I do not like the sea. There isn't a word in any language for it. It isn't like the land, who gives you a fighting chance, or the incorporeal world that allows you to at least descend almost instantly into madness. It isn't even like hell itself, where you know for sure that you are totally effed. Even with all the demented creatures that haunt its depths, the sea is perfectly impartial. It cares not for who or what you are. Whenever you step out into the territory of the sea, know this: the sea is your mistress, whether you be a seasoned captain or a curious mind trying a voyage for the first time. Agent Echo, 1643 EST, Atlantic Ocean. Publicly, there is only one operational permanent underwater research facility on the planet: Aquarius Reef Base. Obviously, I'm not going there. Privately, there are a dozen or so of these facilities. Most are owned by the United States. As the world's superpower, we like to throw money that we don't have at things that we may not necessarily need. Some of our best findings about the ocean have come from these facilities, and some of our worst nightmares as well. Now, this wouldn't be much of a story if I were dealing with the former, right? Sometimes my job really sucks. Give me haunted houses, forest, demons, what have you. But I am land-based through and through. The PSV, platform supply vehicle that I was on, bucked and heaved in the swells of the Atlantic. The sun was still out, but the sky was a dingy gray, completely overcast and making the normally bluish ocean water a dark, opaque color. White caps broke against the side of the ship, sending sea spray over the railing and onto the deck, making everything slippery, even the anti-skid paint coating it had on it. To say that I don't have my sea legs is an understatement. I suck at the sea. I clung to the railing on the starboard side, leaning my head over and waiting for the next dry heave. I had already chucked out my guts earlier in the trip, and I had already maxed out my allowable doses of Dramamine. I sure looked terrible. The crew's earlier laughter at my seasickness had faded to one of concern, with a random crew member wandering up to give me a bottle of water to replenish my fluids. They probably had it on a duty cycle at this point. "Hey, whose turn is it to go give Echo some water?" I managed to get my nausea under control for the time being, and I flipped myself around to lean against the railing, eyes lifting so that I could survey the ship itself. The PSV Lynx looked like a civilian vessel for the most part. Close to 100 meters in length, the hull was a solid black, with the accommodation, which is pretty much the living space of the ship, painted a contrasting white. The accommodation sat mostly on the foredeck of the ship close to the front, making a small forecastle while maximizing room on the foredeck and poop deck for the supplies and room for the research. Underneath the skin, though, the PSV was certainly not civilian. What? You thought that the US Navy only had big gray ships emblazoned with their logo? Come on. Even the Navy has some secret squirrel stuff. The Lynx was better equipped than many destroyers as far as tech went. That was the whole deal with this operation. DARPA isn't the only defense research component of the United States, and I wasn't the only agency represented. The ship-wide intercom sounded out over the waves. "All agency personnel report to the briefing room." The message repeated, and I peeled myself off the railing to stagger inside. The briefing room was a decent size, with a projector screen on the back wall that took up much of the surface. The projector itself, hanging from the ceiling, hummed softly as it awaited use. A large desk in the shape of a steel oval with the ends cut off sat central, with multiple plush swivel chairs surrounding it. I wasn't the first to enter, nor was I the last. Like everyone else, my ID card sat in a holder attached to the lanyard around my neck, one that the boss had made up for me at the last minute since my agency didn't use a common access card like the rest of the DoD. I sat in the middle on the right side, taking up little space and flanked by members of the other agencies. The room was filled with muted conversation, people who knew each other obviously. I stayed silent. All in all, I saw suits mostly, with 2 men in OCP uniforms standing against the back wall, uniforms sanitized. It's easy to pick out the Tier 1 guys in uniform. They hate wearing them for the most part. A man stood up at the front wearing a US Navy uniform, but also without insignia or name. He was tall with short cropped salt and pepper hair and a weathered but still handsome face. Green eyes peeked out from a constantly darkened brow, the kind that didn't exactly care for BS. I liked him already. "Take your seats, ladies and gentlemen." His gravel-infused voice brought the room to a complete standstill. "My name is Captain Jensen. Let's get this started." The lights dimmed, allowing the projector to show up against the screen. "We'll be arriving on station in approximately 1 hour. Backstory, as much as I can tell you, is that one of our subsurface Atlantic research stations has started sending out strange messages through the encrypted channels. Our replies to these messages have been disregarded, with no true sit-rep regarding the status of the experiments or the personnel within. So, following protocol, we are sending the QRF in with a few guests. Sam, your squad will take Agent Twombly with you." He paused, allowing for Twombly, a guy with shaggy dark hair and a meek demeanor, to raise his hand. "He's your resident IT guy. You'll move through airlock Alpha once we dock. From there, sweep through the living quarters and up to the admin offices. If everything looks fine and personnel are accounted for, then start ascertaining the source of the strange transmissions." Sam, one of the OCP-clad men, a short man with long, dark brown hair and a thick beard, nodded slowly. Captain Jensen continued. "Naeem, your squad will take Agent Echo." He looked at me as I raised my hand, cocking a brow as if to say, "Effin' really?" Then he continued. "You'll go through airlock Bravo, move through the research lab, and to the sub-dock. While Sam and his guys check on the people, you'll be seeing if the lab and everything in it are kosher. Either way, make contact with the head researcher, Dr. Alyssa Lint. If there's anything wrong, she can tell you what's happening." He paused and scanned the room. "Questions? No? All right, dismissed. Naeem, Agent Echo, stand fast." The room stood in unison and filed out, leaving me alone in the room with Jensen and Naeem. I just remained seated. Naeem took the chair opposite me and we waited for Jensen to speak. "Listen, hopefully this is something buggy with the software. If for some reason it isn't, be careful. Dr. Lint had some seriously bad things down there that she's messing with. The lady isn't exactly 100% stable. If things have gone sideways, your objective has changed. Sam's squad will be pulling out given certain criteria, specifically the evacuation of personnel. But the meat of the job is on you guys. If Lint has lost her effing mind, put a bullet in her head and destroy the station." Naeem quirked a brow. His voice was deep, but lacked the rocky hits to it that Jensen's voice had. He was maybe 6 feet in height, and well built without being a bodybuilder type. His black skin was devoid of wrinkles, but his brown eyes were full of experience. "Any preferred method?" he asked. Jensen shook his head. "No, Echo here will tell you the best way to take out each experiment. This has to be a step-by-step job. We can't risk anything here getting free. Once each experiment is put down individually, you can destroy the rest as you see fit. A Virginia-class sub will be on station to torpedo the place after you exfil." I stuck up my hand. Who said that I knew anything about what was going on down there?" I asked. Jensen turned to me. "Your boss. I don't even know the specifics, but he said that you would know it when you saw them." "Effing thanks, Brain," I sighed, but I nodded. "All right, when are we leaving?" I asked. 30 minutes after arrival on station," Jensen answered. "All right, then let's get you some gear, Agent Echo," Naeem said, and we stood and walked out of the briefing room, leaving Jensen behind. Scientist. I hate scientists, especially government-related ones. Ones that experiment on things that we should never have been dealing with in the first place. Ones that create or discover monstrosities that start world-ending level scenarios. People wonder why I'm hateful sometimes. Well, this stuff makes me want to kick puppies. I followed Naeem into the passageway and down a few ladders into the bowels of the ship. What we entered into was a large room that may have a different purpose on a civilian PSV, but for the Linux, it was an armory, packed full of squad-level firepower. It was standard kit as far as squads went: M4 carbines, grenades, sidearms, 1 or 2 with shotguns. I myself grabbed something rather standard, a Mossberg 500 shotgun. I pushed shells into the bandolier sling and then again into the tubular magazine. Then I secured an M17 9mm pistol. I slid a body armor vest over my head and waited once again. That's something you may not realize. Teams aren't constantly battle-ready at all times. It takes a bit to get geared up, especially for something as sensitive as an underwater research facility. Unlike a normal building, a facility on the seafloor is under tremendous pressure. Any degradation of the structural integrity of the facility can destroy it quite a bit. Thankfully, most of them have automatic systems that can seal off a compromised section. Just hope that you aren't in it when it happens. The PSV docked with the platform that served as the official cover for the facility below. Exploratory wells have been dug in the Atlantic, that much is public knowledge, but very few people have the means to explore what came of them. As it sits, there are a couple of oil platforms in the Atlantic that most of the world doesn't know about simply because of how remote it is. This was one such platform, a derelict hulk that stood out against the gray sky, like some long-dead giant whose carcass remained frozen in time. The teams were offloaded in stages. It was slow going because of the waves rocking the ship, but eventually we all made it on board the platform itself and began the long climb up the rusted and wet steps that groaned against the bolts fixing them to one of the gigantic legs that held the platform aloft. I turned and watched the PSV sail away from the platform, ostensibly to remain away from the platform and anchor to weather the storm and await our findings. Upon reaching the platform proper, Sam and Naeem led us up even more steps to a small shed in the shadow of the central tower. The control room itself was a dingy affair situated at the heart of just about everything. But that wasn't exactly our destination. It would have been a bit cliché to put the entrance to the lab in the control room, right behind a big, clunky computer that was shaped to look like a desk. Instead, what we got was a big, clunky computer shaped like a desk, but with a maintenance shed. Unoriginality points for the US government, everyone. Naeem worked some magic on the dead terminal, and the entire thing shifted to the side, showing a white, brightly lit hallway beyond the terminal itself. We had to duck to enter, but once inside, everything was fine. My brow lowered, confusion working its way across my face. The architecture was beautifully strange. An octagonal hallway that stretched on and down to a landing. The crazy thing is that the hallway had no seams. Nothing that indicated where the ceiling and wall met, nor the wall or the floor. It's as if the entire hall was one large section made of a material that deadened sounds. Boots make a racket on hard floors, and we were making none of that. The landing was similar. Like the hallway, it opened up onto an octagonal room, maybe 10 meters square. Light flowed into the room, but from where I couldn't tell. There were no fixtures, bulbs, or even the distinct hum of fluorescent lights. Wall sockets and switches were absent, as were vents of any kind. Against the white wall were red letters that said, Airlock A. I ran my hand along the letter curiously, but again, there were no seams. Sam, the Squad A leader from earlier, procured a pamphlet from a pocket that sat over his deltoid. He read it, then placed his free hand over the A on the wall and moved it over in small, steady increments. After moving about 6 feet away from the door, a square flashed underneath his hand. A soft green light that pulsed between exact periods of bright and dim. After a few seconds, a tall doorway seam appeared to his left, and without a sound, the door slid to the side and disappeared. Airlock A was open. With me. See y'all on the flip side. His heavy southern accent broke the silence, but it seemed deadened somehow. His point man moved forward, followed by the rest of the team. Once they were all through, the door closed and the wall became seamless once again. That was effing weird. One of the operators spoke up. Naeem, what the heck is this place? Another said. Naeem shook his head. Something above my pay grade, boys and girls. Airlock Bravo is down this hall. He motioned to the side. Another octagonal hallway descended deeper into the structure, with another landing smaller than the current one. We moved forward and down at a steady but somewhat leisurely walking pace. The difference between this and a movie? Well, in the movie they'd be checking corners, bounding forward from cover to cover, weapons raised and ready to go. Here, there wasn't any cover. No real corners to check, save the small landing that turned to show another descending octagonal hallway. As a group, we remained spaced evenly in 2 staggered lines on each side of the hallway. Weapons loaded but at the low ready. The usual banter accompanied the group. Although in hushed tones, there was talking and laughing, a bit of mirth before our entry into the facility itself. After what seemed like an endless number of descending hallways, we reached the bottom landing. It was the same shape as the last one. Red letters spelled out Airlock B on the wall on the far side. Naeem repeated the same motion that Sam had, pressing his hand in a specific, unmarked spot to open the door. We walked through, not really sure what to expect, but knowing that it should be a lab of some sort. Obviously, yeah? But what we got was not expected. The airlock door shut behind us, blending in again with the wall as it had on the other side. We were standing in another faceless room, maybe 10 by 5 meters. From nowhere, a voice chimed through, robotic and cold.
Greetings. Beginning decontamination process.
Steam hissed from newly opened vents in the walls. My brow crinkled in response, nose picking up on the faint scent of something peculiar. I swore softly under my breath. Boss, what? One of the men spoke up from the back just before he fell over. One by one, we dropped, unable to fight the airborne chemical making its way through our system, and soon, unconsciousness took hold and the world faded to black. I woke in a terrible mood. Well, at least more sour than my mood normally was. You know when you get forced awake in the middle of an REM cycle and you feel groggy? Yeah, that was me. I felt like ass, tired, knees weak, arms heavy. I wasn't quite at mom's spaghetti just yet, but I was close. My eyes opened without my permission, moisture blurring my vision and forcing me to blink rapidly to clear it. With a groan, I sat up and tried to take stock of my surroundings. The room I was in smelled like rotten eggs and water damage. Unlike the pristine entryway, the usual fixtures of a room were present. On the moldy ceiling hung fluorescent light fixtures evenly spaced along the surface. Most of them were burnt out, but 3 of them had enough light left to make the room mostly visible, though very dim. Against the back wall was a sink and a toilet made of stainless steel, the kind that you would see in a psych ward. The toilet had no seat, and the sink had just enough of a protrusion to turn the water on, with no sharp corners anywhere. A dilapidated metal desk sat on the left wall with some moldy files and binders atop it. Opposite this was a steel cabinet that was shut tight. The rest of the room was filled with beds, all bolted to the floor and in varying states of disrepair. I felt a pinch in my right arm and looked over to see an old butterfly needle sticking out of my arm, connected to old tubing that had gelled. There was a questionable fluid within. I promptly pulled it free and rubbed the angry red injection site. In the room with me was Naeem and 3 of his guys. Naeem was sitting on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temple to make the drowsiness go away. He was wearing his OCP uniform just like the others were, but something was different. I looked down at myself, noticing that my armor vest and weapons were gone, as was my cell phone, badge, and anything else. The same went for Naeem and his guys. Figures the worst would happen. He groaned, forcing himself to his feet. I did the same, holding the metal headboard to steady myself. 2 of the others in Naeem's squad began to stir as I walked over to what looked like a dingy screen sitting a foot away from a large steel door. The screen had a few cracks on the inside, pretty much unusable for the most part. I pulled at the door and it came free with a loud, ear-splitting shriek. The place was silent. Dead. I pushed the door open as far as I could until it made a thunk against the wall to the side. I stood there in shock, staring down at the floor. The room we had come from was one of several like it. The chamber we were staring at was absolutely gargantuan. A circular mass with a single column in the middle and doorways on every level. From our location to the opposite wall was easily 100 meters, maybe a little more, and stretched vertically at least that high. Attached to the column was a large arm which had a grasping mechanism attached, not unlike the ones used to grab shipping containers. Along the floor, which was about 6 feet below us, were bodies. Hundreds of them in varying states of decay and levels of completeness. Some looked rather fresh, while others seemed to be one step away from being a skeleton. Others were missing arms or legs, while even more still had arms and legs where they should not have been. I fought the urge to throw up. The smell was absolutely effing rancid, and the sight that went along with it didn't help any. By Allah, what's going on here? Naeem appeared behind me. His 2 other men were standing behind him. Disheveled, weary, and honestly, they were effing terrified. Dr. Lint should have known that she would have fallen off the deep end, I said, almost in a daze. Wait, you know who's doing this? Said a squad mate from behind. His name was Rafal. His buddy was called Dugar, and he remained silent. Naeem fixed me with a look. One of those, I'm not pissed yet, but I'd be willing to slap you for info kind of looks. I let out a small breath. Lint used to be the director of my agency. Had been for years until one day she just resigned to take another position. It was gonna happen anyways, given that her direction for us was to try and navigate through the fabric of our reality and enter into another to find out where a lot of the cryptids are coming from. Fight them on their home turf, what's so bad about that? Rafal piped up. Well, everything is bad about that. We only live and survive these encounters because eldritch beings use most of their power to make themselves known in the reality that we live in. Even then, they F with our minds, our bodies, and destroy our souls and emotions. And you think that it's smart to hop out from behind the barrier and try to fight them mano-a-mano? I don't even know what an eldritch is, Raphael responded. Would you mind explaining that one too? I let out an exasperated breath and began to climb down from the room itself, using points along the wall as a footing. They're things you don't want to see, kid. Look, I'm getting out of here. You do what you want. Naeem started after me. Now hold on, Echo. We have a mission to finish here. Secure the lab, neutralize the dock if necessary. That still hasn't changed, and I'm not about to let you walk out of here because you got scared. I dropped down to the ground, and he dropped right after me, with Rafal and Dugar following shortly along after. I stepped up to him and got right into his face. Well, given our height difference, it probably looked pretty comical. Look, as far as I'm concerned, this mission is aft, Naeem. Remember the schematics of the lab? You think a room this big can fit into an undersea lab? Lent is a Looney Tune, which would be fine if she wasn't also a genius. If we make it out of here alive, sue me or something. I really don't care. The only good thing that we have to go on is that it seems like she lost control of at least this part of the facility. As if on cue, a steady set of beeping filled the massive room and continued for a few seconds. The facility shuddered and creaked under pressure while the lights flickered and dimmed dramatically. The room went black. The sound of 4 doors opening at once went through the room. We waited, hesitating, frozen in place by the sound of wet flesh slapping together, like someone was dumping dead bodies into a landfill. Disgusting, slurping sounds mixed with the crunch of bones took its place, like multiple mouths eating in unison. Now listen, I don't get completely terrified often. There isn't much that does that, honestly. This, though, it was something else. The lights came up, and in the room with us were 4 absolute nightmares. They looked like giant caterpillars, molted tan and black skin stretching across fat, tube-like bodies, splitting and bleeding in many places as they lumbered along. Hands sprouted from their bodies, all different colors and sizes, grasping and pulling the creatures along the floor. Human hair of different colors covered mouths that constantly bit, containing teeth that were cracked and bleeding under the pressure. As they passed close enough to a dead body, the mouths would take a bite. In the center was the main orifice, a mouth 3 times as large as the others. Multiple rows of flat, human-like teeth filled the abnormally wide opening like rings on a tree. It reached another body, and the hands grabbed it up, pulling and tearing the corpse limb from limb. The smaller mouths feasting on the appendages while the main bit down in even bites on the torso. Blood and viscera spilling down it like a waterfall. The crunch that came from it each time it chewed on the torso will never leave my mind. Naeem, to his credit, pushed down his nausea. He got my attention, pointing at it, then at his own eyes, finishing with a negative hand gesture. Puzzled, it took him a time or two to get it through my thick skull. The things, they had no eyes. A light bulb went off and I nodded in understanding. I pointed to a door on the far side with a blinking green light that turned red at random. He nodded and I started forward, picking my way around the limbs and bodies so as not to trip. Naeem followed behind, with Dagar behind him and Rafal coming in last. No sound. No sound. Not a peep. Not a breath. I had to wind my way through the room to avoid the others. The flight mode of my psyche was engaged, but I pushed it down just enough not to run for it. I didn't know how fast they were, but oh, by God, I wanted to run. Naeem seemed a full shade more pale, as did Dagar and Rafal. Dagar, specifically, was in bad shape. He was more seasoned than Rafal, but some people just have naturally bad constitutions, and Dagar was one of them. He hurled. Vomit spewed out of his mouth onto the floor. I turned. Naeem turned. We stared at him in horror. There was a creature near to us on the right and one on the left, and they both reacted instantly. With an ear-splitting shriek, like several humans howling in pain, the worms charged at him. He tried to run. He really did. They were so fast. The hands propelled them along at a ridiculous speed. The 2 creatures smashed together with a horrible amount of force, catching Dagar between them and crushing him like a grape. The force was so much that the spray covered me, Naeem, and Rafal. Standing there, soaked in blood, mouth agape, I couldn't do anything. The 2 creatures separated with Dagar's body in between. The hands pulled him apart, the mouths feasted, and the creature began sharing the torso like some sick, twisted Lady and the Tramp remake. I turned and continued my slow walk while they ate him. After some time, we made it to the base of the steps. Then we turned to look for Rafal. He gingerly made his way up after a minute. Then we traversed the steps with excruciating slowness. We finally paused and looked back. The creatures had continued their cleanup of the dead bodies. I opened the door and it groaned to the side. We darted in and shut it in time to hear the sound of 1,000 hands against the other side. Now, I allowed myself to throw my guts up. Naeem and Rafal did the same. It was like our bodies were nice enough to get us out of danger before spilling it all. I leaned against the wall and slid down to rest, tension leaving my body and rendering me pretty darn tired. Rafal walked a few feet down the hall to the T-junction. There was a lab down the intersecting hallway, elevator to the living quarters down the other side. We heard a few buzzes, a couple of attempts at the door handle. "Locked," he said, frustrated.
It's locked.
We jumped, startled. A smooth, British-accented tenor came from a small speaker puck in the ceiling. I looked to Naeem and mouthed, "Lint." The good doctor continued.
Agent Echo, surprised to see you again.
"What kind of BS are you up to, Doc?" I asked.
Oh, the usual. Dimensional travel, experimentation, you know, the whole mad scientist shtick.
A chuckle came from her end. "Those bodies, were they part of your experimentation too?" Naeem called out.
All experiments have their losses,
the doctor said. "You realize we're going to put a bullet in you, right? You're a whack job," Rafal called out, fist clenched.
A threat from a tin soldier. Cute,
Dr. Lentz said. "Rafal, shut up," Naeem spat. "What is this, Alyssa?" I asked evenly. I think I already knew the answer, though.
Project Stonewall and Project Canalus, dear. If you remember, that is. Let's dispense with the busy talk, kids. Canalus is going rather swimmingly. Except for one little hitch. After I sent it over to the living quarters, they came back rather upset.
"Well, Doc, you seem to have a knack for understatement," I said. "What the F does that mean?" "Living quarters, wait. That was Sam's team," Naeem said.
Was is a good way of putting it. By now they are probably being used as decoration. Sheol is a rather frightening place.
"Sheol?" Naeem questioned. I looked at him. "That's what she calls the dimension beyond ours," I said. "Then why did you send them?" Rafal screamed.
Research. I needed to see what would happen to a human mind that was unprotected by Stonewall. My initial expectations were that they would have gone mad. Obviously, I was correct. I'm not going to bother with any more questions. So here's the deal I'm offering you. I installed a manual decompression feature in the living quarters. Normally, it would be right across the hall. But when that section of the lab returned, things got a bit topsy-turvy. 2 hallways down and 2 to the right, you'll find a security room. Inside is an idiot-proof panel that will allow me to decompress and destroy that section. Activate it and I'll give you enough time to get out. Deal? Well, you don't really have a choice, do you?
She said. The intercom clicked off and the door to the living quarters unlocked, the red light turning green. Naeem grunted. "F it, I'd rather die of decompression than by one of those worm things," he said, and then walked over to the door and pulled the handle to the side. The door opened without a sound. An acrid stench of death hit us like a ton of bricks, bringing up a new wave of nausea. We pulled our shirts up over our noses and walked inside silently. The lights were on, but the halls were the same. Dingy, rusted, and run down. The contrast between the entrance hallway and the stuff inside was so strange. We passed through the hall and paused before a window. The scientists within were seated at lab tables, eating as if nothing had happened. Their lab coats were dirty, clothes ripped and bloody, but they were just eating. We moved on quietly. 2 hallways down, turning right, then moving 2 more hallways down. The security office looked out of place, like someone had done a makeshift install on the entire section. We stepped inside and closed the door and immediately threw up once more. Sam and his team were there. Were everywhere, in fact. Stripped, field-dressed, and sectioned. They hung from makeshift hooks on the ceiling. Rafal finally lost it. He went over to the pile of rifles in the corner and began checking them each one by one. Empty. Empty. Effing empty. Empty! The rifle sat there without magazines or ammo. However, in the clothes and body armor were knives at least. We went over and procured what we could. Canteens of water, which we quickly chugged, and a knife apiece, except for Rafal. Carrying 2, his maddened eyes turned to us. Decompress this place. I'll distract him. He ran out the door without another word, though Naeem yelled after him. I walked over to the panel and activated it, then pulled a large, heavy switch downward to complete the process. Screaming and yelling could be heard outside. Stabbing noises, struggles. Rafal was trying. The intercom beeped again.
What? Did you think there would be sirens and flashing lights? Get going, you have 60 seconds.
Lint said and then clicked off the intercom. We ran, sprinted, lungs burning. At the intersection, there was a mass of people. They were all focused on a failing Rafal. The poor kid had bite marks all over him. Scratches, blood running down his body. He was wild and fueled by a maddening need for vengeance. We turned left and bolted. Wait! Help me, please! Rafal screamed as they kept dragging him down. With tears in my eyes, I kept running. Naeem gritted his teeth and we pushed through the door, only to slam it shut as soon as we could. A few moments later, a deep billow shook the facility as the living quarters imploded. Lights dimmed and we were knocked off our feet. Rafal, or the crazed scientist, wouldn't be feeling anything anymore. The door to the lab opened then. White, clean, sterile. Just the way that Alyssa liked it. Gone were the dingy hallways, the creaking sounds, the bloody smears on the walls, and the dead smells. The hallway leading to Alyssa Lent's lab was the same as the one we had first used when entering the facility. We walked to the end, and the door opened for us, allowing us to step inside. Her lab was clean, neat, and tidy. Machines of various sizes littered the walls of the large room. A device with a platform stood along the back wall, almost like a gateway. The whir of machinery was almost soothing. Go! What the? Naeem slapped his neck, then looked and staggered to the side a bit before falling over onto the ground unconscious. On the other side of him was the Lady of the Hour. She looked no older than the last time that I had seen her, which was about 6 years ago. The knife in my hand dropped when I saw her pointing a pistol at me. In her other hand was a needle she had used to knock Naeem out. The doc was a slight woman, maybe a hair taller than me. She was one of those scientist types that would not eat for days just so they wouldn't interrupt their own work. Certainly not in the greatest shape, but then again, she looked pretty good for a mid-50s woman. A small button nose sat between and below a sharp set of brown eyes that were so dark, one wouldn't be faulted for thinking that they were black. Black hair was pulled back into a tight professional bun. She was part Indian, part British. Her genius was only matched by her overall instability. It seems like my tin soldier didn't make it. Oh well, this one will do. Consider it a professional courtesy that it wasn't you I chose, Echo. Chosen for what, Doc? What the F is happening? Project Stonewall, my dear. Sheol is not a place the human mind or body can traverse. So I have to make it stronger. Unfortunately, sending the living quarters tripped the emergency protocol. Oh well, it gave me a fresh subject. Step back, please, into the glass door there. Oh, okay, or what? You'll shoot me? Come on, Doc. A searing, hot pain shot through my leg. The doctor had pulled the trigger and sent a 9mm slug into my thigh, dropping me to the ground with a scream of complete pain. I don't care how badass you think you are. Getting shot sucks. What the? Shut up, Echo. I told you that condescending attitude of yours will get you killed one day. Now, last chance, girl. Go, she said. Pushing myself to my butt, I scooted backwards, trailing blood on the floor until I entered the small, circular glass tube that she had told me to. Looking to the side, I saw buttons. An elevator. I shot her a confused look. She hit a button and the glass slide closed. No Deus Ex Machina for you today, Echo, the doctor said. You lost your living quarters and you're on the bottom of the ocean. What do you think you're gonna do? I said. Yeah, you mean that submarine parked outside my door? I have that under control. What? I laughed. Please enlighten me, I said as I tore a piece of my shirt to stuff into the bullet hole. Oh, Echo. She took a tablet from the wall and crouched down in front of the partition and pressed it up against the glass for me to see. When did you ever think that I wasn't in control? I stared, horrified. The living quarters appeared on the screen in one corner, the body room in another, the room we woke up in. The walls turned white, moving and changing to mimic the inside of the lab. Pristine and flawless. The disgusting caterpillar creatures looked at the screen and made their way back to their enclosures. And the scientist? They had torn Rafal apart. But then they stood calm, still alive, and not decompressed. She had used us to stall for time and to gain a test subject in return, one who was not tainted by Sheol. The elevator I was in moved upwards, and all I could do was stare at the doctor until she went out of sight. The elevator gained speed, moving faster and faster until it hit the open water. An orange flotation device bloomed from the opaque top, slowly guiding me upwards. I looked down at the lab. It was fully intact. A light bloomed in the middle and grew bigger and bigger until it swallowed the lab and half of the submarine that was ready to evac and fire on it. Then the light receded and the lab was gone, along with half of the submarine.